Previously on Squatchspot. Investigating recent possible Sasquatch activity in a very remote location, I observed bipedal movement near my camp in the dead of night. And while investigating the area, I discovered very compelling evidence that supports the Sasquatch are still at these lower elevations, and recent fire activity in the area may explain why. And on this episode, I continue my investigation of these lower elevation locations, and I venture into a new area I have yet to explore. And we'll also be taking a brief look at some of the evidence I've collected since my initial launch of this channel. It's all coming up next on Squatchspot. Hello and welcome to Squatchspot. I'm Darrin Smith, and I hope that all of you out there are staying safe and that you and your loved ones are well. I am currently back out in the field, and I'm trying to access that area that we've been investigating recently, where that father and son had that unusual incident where they heard that large creature making crazed noises in the nearby woods, and it created so much anxiety for them that they actually fled the area. And I'm trying to access that location at Sandy Camp. However, once again, as you can see behind me, I have ended up at a river crossing, and I definitely don't think it's a good idea for me to attempt this crossing with my vehicle. So unfortunately, we are going to have to once again abort our attempts to get into that specific encounter location. However, I am going to continue my investigation of this area, because you saw in those last two episodes that based on my investigation of that area, I'm very compelled to believe that there are still Sasquatch in this area and at these lower elevations, which is really surprising to me because, as I mentioned numerous times on videos, I believe the Sasquatch move up to those much higher elevations during the summer months, and those elevations are usually above 8,000 feet. So we are definitely at a much lower elevation in this particular area, but I have noticed several environmental nuances that I think are very enticing to the Sasquatch, one of which being an abundance of water. So I was surprised to see that there is still an abundance of water in this particular area. And you even saw in the last episode we had rain, which is definitely a infrequent occurrence here in California. So I do see the potential of this particular environment. And as I've also mentioned on these previous videos, we are in very close proximity to Area X, that area that I've been investigating where I've had some very unusual encounters that were almost paranormal in nature. I was seeing movement out of the corner of the eye, and I was seeing a blurred figure moving through the woods, and I was also getting some very unusual readings on my EMF detector. So definitely some unusual things happening in Area X, and also we are literally just a stone's throw from my encounter location from March 3rd of 2020. So this area I absolutely recognized as being prime Sasquatch habitat. However, I just didn't think that they would still be at these lower elevations this time of year. And I did mention that the recent fires in the area, most notably the Creek Fire, may have something to do with this. And I mentioned on the last episode I was seeing a lot of evidence of Sasquatch activity around these burn zones, almost as if they were trying to find ways out of this particular environment here. So that is very intriguing to me, because if the Sasquatch are doing these seasonal migrations around, there is a very good chance that some of these fires have created a impassable barrier for them. And I think that physical evidence that I was finding in very close proximity to those burn zones was very intriguing, in the sense that they may be trying to find alternative routes to continue with these migration movement patterns. So I definitely found that very intriguing, and I definitely think we need to continue our investigation of this area. So I don't know if you could see the embankment behind me here in this game trail leading down. There's definitely an abundance of game trails in the area, especially along the water sources here. And the predominant impressions on these game trails is cow, because they do bring a lot of cows up to the higher Sierra Nevada mountains here to do their free grazing. So there are definitely a lot of cows in the area. But as you recall, on that incident that occurred that we investigated on the last 2 episodes, that was one thing the witness did take note of. There were not cows at this elevation yet. So this was definitely prior to these cows being brought into this area. And so the witness was able to kind of rule out cow as being the animal that was making the unusual sounds in the forest. And now I also mentioned that that father and son had spent an incredible amount of time out in these outdoor areas, and they have ventured into that particular camp for every season for the past 14 years. So these 2 gentlemen were very comfortable in these environments, and they were very aware of the animals that would call these areas home. So that incident that occurred was definitely something very out of the ordinary that did chase these gun-wielding gentlemen out of the area. So that is definitely something significant to note there. I mentioned this numerous times on previous videos, the importance of safety when moving around water sources. And when you're out in the field alone, it's really a good idea not to approach the water sources, just because they are hazardous, and they should definitely be considered so. And just looking around this environment, another thing you have to keep in mind regarding the water is, with all these cow in the area, they're not so particular about where they are going to the bathroom. And already I have found a lot of cow droppings actually in the water, along the banks of the water. So you definitely want to be well aware that there is some significant environmental concerns when actually consuming this water, and you really shouldn't be doing it, and you should definitely be treating it appropriately if you are going to be doing so. So that's just another thing to be thinking about when it comes to water safety. So I've mentioned it a number of times already, but the temperature at these lower elevations is high. And down in the Oakhurst area, Mariposa area, we are still getting temperatures well over 100 degrees here in, mid-August already. So even at these mid elevations, the temperatures are still in the mid to high 80s, if not the low 90s. So it is very unpleasant moving around in these environments in this heat, and I think it is absolutely unpleasant for the Sasquatch to be moving around in this heat as well. And as I have mentioned before, I do think the Sasquatch will spend a lot of time in the waterways, which is definitely areas that you really want to focus your efforts. But I also want to take note of the reports out there that are saying that the Sasquatch is putting off some sort of scent, and there's a number of theories as to why this could be. And one of them that I support is the higher temperatures, I think, creates perspiration on the animal, and I think it's just that accumulation of perspiration and scent that is what that odor is. And we have the skunk ape in Florida, and it is appropriately named because of the scent that it is putting off. And I think it has to do with the waterways that creature is moving through, but also the higher temperatures and that buildup of perspiration and just scent on the animal. And you can absolutely smell bear. If there are bear in the area, you can smell them for the same reasons. So I definitely think it's something to kind of be aware of, that if you do have some unusual odor in the area, that it could be a bear, but it could also be a Sasquatch. And I also think this is another reason why the Sasquatch move up to those higher elevations this time of year. Not necessarily because they can't stand their own scent, but because they are getting out of the heat and getting up to those cooler environments where you have that abundance of water, you have that abundance of food sources, and you have temperatures that are comfortable. So I definitely think we need to be focusing our efforts on getting up to those higher elevations. It's definitely a priority at this point, and it is definitely something we are going to want to engage here in the near future. Since I launched this channel in 2017, I have spent an incredible amount of time in the field conducting Sasquatch research, and I feel I have brought a significant amount of very credible evidence to the table that I believe strongly supports the existence of Sasquatch. I know the Sasquatch are real. I have seen them, and I have encountered them on a number of occasions. However, if you are not a believer, there is really nothing I can say that will change that. However, since I have had quite a few new subscribers to this channel, I thought I would do a brief recap of some of the evidence I have collected during my investigation. The first piece of evidence is FLIR footage I captured while investigating an area of numerous sightings. It was in the dead of winter and in the dead of night. It had snowed that night, and I had been out in the field for several hours, scanning the area using the FLIR unit. As I was preparing to leave the area, out of the blue, a tree came crashing down in very close proximity to me. Following the tree fall, I quickly scanned the area I had scanned numerous times previously with the FLIR unit, and I captured something very compelling on camera just prior to the FLIR unit's battery going dead. Here is a comparison of the FLIR footage taken that night. The anchors used during the analysis of this footage were a tree stump and log, as well as several background trees. When reviewing the footage, it is clear a large upright figure had moved into frame. And this figure had strikingly similar proposed Sasquatch features, and it was evident on the video footage this figure was an animate being and not a stationary object. Enlarging the head area, there are noticeable characteristics that strongly resemble eyewitness descriptions of Sasquatch. Though I have received an onslaught of ridicule over this footage, and many in the Bigfoot community claim this is nothing more than a bush or tree, I absolutely disagree, and I feel the comparison clearly illustrates a very large bipedal figure had moved into the environment. And the video footage clearly demonstrates this is an animate being and not a stationary object. And the physical characteristics, in my opinion, strongly resemble physical attributes of a Sasquatch. The second piece of evidence is also from video footage taken while out in the field. This footage was captured during my March 3, 2020 encounter, when while investigating an area near where I had recently discovered footprint impressions, I heard a very loud Sasquatch vocalization as I parked my vehicle. Though I did not capture that initial vocalization on audio, I did capture some very compelling audio, which included this primate guttural noise, followed by tree knocking or chest slapping, and a very loud primate huff. Following this vocal display, I followed the Sasquatch through the woods using my parabolic microphone to pinpoint its location. As I moved into an area of heavy brush where I believed the Sasquatch was hiding, I was not focused on what I was recording with the camera, as I was maintaining a watchful eye of my surroundings. However, reviewing the footage days later, it was discovered the camera had captured a figure that was hiding in the brush. The video footage clearly demonstrates this was an animate being and not an environmental anomaly. The figure makes a dramatic shift in position, however, its physical mass and proportions remain consistent. I returned to the area days later to conduct an investigation of the area and a look for physical evidence. While there, I discovered what I believe is a Sasquatch nest, which was completely surrounded by heavy brush, with the exception of two distinct pathways that led into the nest site, where the vegetation had been groomed. I also discovered numerous footprint impressions in the area, as well as multiple hair samples in the nest site. The hair samples have been analyzed and do not match any known animal species. However, they do match Sasquatch hair anatomy. And throughout my investigations, we have discovered numerous trackways and footprint impressions, ranging from 11 inches to 17 inches. Surprisingly, despite the collection of evidence I have brought to the table, the large majority of the academics and A-listers within the Bigfoot community are either completely dismissive of my investigations and findings or are forthcoming with their insults and ridicule. At times, I find the whole project rather disheartening. However, it is the support and encouragement I receive from all of you that keeps me going, and I want to thank all of you for that. And for the time being, I am going to continue my efforts. So I mentioned I have seen some interesting environmental nuances in the area that I believe are very enticing to the Sasquatch. However, that being said, at these lower elevations, the temperatures are much higher. We have been definitely in the triple digits here at these lower elevations, and granted, we are a little bit higher up on the mountain in this area. We are still way shy of what I would think would be comfortable for the Sasquatch. So I really do think the lack of water and food sources in the area, and definitely the increase in temperatures and the influx of the tourism into the area, I definitely think all these are really points that motivate the Sasquatch to move out of the area. And just the temperature alone, I think, would be very unpleasant for them. So I don't really think the Sasquatch do like being at these lower elevations. And what was interesting about that incident we did investigate, I do believe there was Sasquatch in the area, this area, and it may be an indication of their aggressive behavior. I mean, that Sasquatch was creating a display there at the camp, eventually chasing the father and son out of the area. So if the Sasquatch is exhibiting this aggressive behavior, it could be at a state of frustration, being kind of enclosed in these environments. Now, I also mentioned on the last episode that the witness of that encounter, the individual who actually put in the incident report, was saying he discovered footprint impressions in the area, and he based a rough estimate based on his shoe size. And so the footprint impressions were roughly 22 inches based on that rough measurement there. They didn't actually measure the footprint impressions there on site. And I also discovered those other impressions in the area that were, I think, 14 to 14 and a half inches. So it does lead me to believe that there are more than one Sasquatch in the area, or there was just the one individual that had maybe some sort of anomaly caused on that footprint impression during the incident site. So they weren't absolutely convinced they were footprint impressions. However, they did note them in the report. So it could be the same Sasquatch. It could be more than one individual in the area. So far, the only concrete evidence I have found is the one individual that was moving around, because I found the footprint impressions in 2 different locations, and they were very consistent in size and shape. And also we heard the 2 unusual howls coming from that gorge that eventually led down into that river system that I eventually set up my camp near. So I do think there is at least one Sasquatch in the area, and possibly more. So I do think we should continue our investigation of this area, and I am going to continue the rest of the day in the environment, kind of searching for the physical evidence that there are Sasquatch in the area. But I also absolutely acknowledge the need to get up to those much higher elevations to try to encounter the Sasquatch at locations where I assume they are to be at this point. So we definitely want to get up to those higher elevations, and also I want to get back to that nest site area that we discovered, because I think it's very important that I get in there and search for that physical evidence, look for those hair samples, because if that is a nest site or a bedding area, there is going to be a lot of hair in that environment. So we definitely have to get back up into that area to continue that investigation. But at this point, I am going to continue my investigation of this area and just kind of see what we have going on in this environment. So when you're conducting Sasquatch research, I think it's a really good idea to kind of pick a few locations that you can kind of focus your efforts on. And I think you can ascertain where those locations are by doing your research online and finding out where the historic sightings are in your area. And also, as I mentioned numerous times before, the locals are going to be absolutely your #1 resource when determining where the most probable locations will be for a Sasquatch encounter. And really get out into those environments and investigate. And then you want to select a handful of locations that you're going to be focusing your efforts on. In my example, I have Area X. I have my encounter location from March 3rd. We have that nest site location at that higher elevation, and now we're investigating this location. And I think once you've established your research areas, you want to continue to go back to those locations throughout the year, just to kind of look at any sort of environmental changes that have occurred in that area. And you really want to pay attention to the seasonal changes. You want to be paying attention to the water sources in the area, the food sources in the area, and also the general health of the forest habitat. And I think by doing so, you're going to start seeing a really good picture of your research area, and it's really going to help you to determine where the Sasquatch are going to be at any given time during the year. As I mentioned, I do believe the Sasquatch tend to hang out just below the snow line. So during the winter months, I do believe the Sasquatch come down out of the higher elevations and they're skirting just below the snow line. So that's an example of the type of movement pattern that I am talking about here. And I really think by focusing your efforts on a few locations and really kind of putting your heart and soul into investigating those areas, you're going to start seeing some interesting nuances in those environments that will be very enticing to the Sasquatch during certain times of the year. And that's really going to help you pinpoint locations where you are very likely to have a Sasquatch encounter. I continue my investigation of the area. However, I did not find any definitive evidence a Sasquatch were in the area. However, based on my previous outing in this area, and the physical evidence I did discover, I am very compelled to believe there are Sasquatch still at these lower elevations, and the physical evidence I discovered near the burn zones may indicate the Sasquatch are looking for routes out of this area, and up to those higher elevations, where there is more readily available food and water. I also think it is important for us to get up to those higher elevations, to continue our investigation and a search for the Sasquatch. However, in the immediate future, I plan to get back up to that possible nest site we discovered to search for physical evidence, most notably hair. Until then, please stay safe and take care. I'm Darrin Smith, and I'll see you here on Squatchspot.